Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'd now like to take a moment to introduce Dr. Paul Myers of the REMS TA Center. Paul?
Thanks, Akshay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Akshay mentioned, I'm Paul Myers, and I'm the Director of Research and Development at the Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, also known as the REMS TA Center. I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar, Use of Social Media in School Behavioral Threat Assessments. This webinar will present information that districts and schools may want to consider when developing or implementing threat assessment and social media processes, policies, and procedures. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the REMS TA Center's website via our webinars page, along with an accompanying resource list following this event. Before we start, we have a few brief housekeeping items to cover. The following tips will help ensure you are able to download files, hear the audio, request technical assistance, and ask questions during this event. You can download a copy of the presentation slides and other resources referenced in this webinar from the handouts box on your screen. Select the name of the resource or resources you would like to review and click the Download File button. As a reminder, there's no dial-in for this webinar. Audio is available via the link provided. If you're experiencing difficulty hearing the audio stream, please turn up your computer speaker volume at this time. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please contact the REMS TA Center at info@remstacenter.org. You may also request technical assistance using the Q&A tool. Questions are viewable to the webinar moderator only. Finally, to ask a question, use the Q&A tool on your screen to send your message to the facilitator. Questions will be answered in the order in which they appear and as time permits following the presentation. If you would like to submit questions for the question and answer portion of this webinar and are able to do so via the box provided by Adobe, please email your questions again to info@remstacenter.org. Let's first take a look at the agenda of today's webinar. We will begin with a brief introduction to behavioral threat assessments, also known simply as threat assessments in schools. In part 2 of the webinar, we will describe some of the more common forms of social media and how schools and students can use social media. Next, in part 3, we'll discuss how to integrate social media into threat assessment planning. We'll conclude the webinar in part 4 with the question and answer session. I'd also like to introduce my two co-presenters today. Madeline Sullivan is an Education Program Analyst in the Office of Safe and Healthy Students at the U.S. Department of Education. She serves as Contracting Office Representative for the REMS TA Center. Prior to joining the federal government workforce, Madeline provided technical assistance on pro-social skill development, violence prevention, and school emergency management after having served as a special educator. Mia Langheim was hired to create and manage the School Safety Information Program shortly after Sandy Hook in March 2013 at the State of Illinois Fusion Center. This is the only program of its kind in the country that is able to share intelligence information that is usually only available to first responders, to administrators, and those who need to know in schools and campuses. This program works closely with not only administrators and those who make safety decisions, but also school and campus police officers. The School Information Sharing Program's goal is to share information with those making safety decisions in educational facilities from local, state, and federal agencies about current threats and trends that could affect students, staff, faculty, and building facilities. MIA is constantly working on bridging the communication gap and educating those in public safety and education to help all involved improve safety decisions. MIA's background includes experience in research and large data management for the past 12 years, teaching at the college level for the past 8 years, and managing the School Safety and Information Sharing Program for the past 3.5 years. To help provide some perspective, the primary purpose of a threat assessment is to prevent targeted violence in schools by students, where a school is deliberately selected as the location for the attack and is not simply a random site of opportunity. A threat assessment can also be conducted to determine whether or not a student poses a risk to themselves or others. Ultimately, the school, districts, and community partners should make the final decision about the focus of the threat assessment that best meets the needs of the district, school, and locality. The focus of the threat assessment may just be on targeted violence, or broader to include threats such as bullying and/or fighting. The process has been defined as a fact-based investigative and analytical approach that focuses on what a particular student is doing and saying, and not on whether the student looks like those who have attacked schools in the past. Threat assessment emphasizes the importance of such behavior and communications for identifying, evaluating, and reducing the risk posed by students who may be thinking about or planning for a school-based attack. This definition comes from the Safe School Initiative, also known as the SSI, which I'll describe in greater detail shortly. I would like to point out a couple of things from this definition. First, a threat assessment focuses on what the student is doing and saying, not on what they look like. It is important to remember that specific actions and words by individuals are the basis for a threat assessment, not hunches or stereotypes by the observer based on an individual's appearance or looks. The SSI determined there is no accurate or useful profile of students who engage in targeted school violence. Second, the threat assessment identifies and evaluates wherever a student poses a risk. A threat assessment can be conducted before an actual risk has been made if a student is seen to pose a threat. The Safe School Initiative was a joint initiative between the U.S. Secret Service and U.S. Department of Education, or ED, to examine the pre-incident thinking and behavior of 41 student attackers in 37 incidents between 1974 and 2000 to identify information that could aid in preventing future attacks. To be defined as targeted school violence for the purposes of this study, an incident had to satisfy two criteria. One, a current or recent former student attacks someone at his or her school with lethal means, and the student attacker purposefully chose his or her school as location of the attack. The two images on the left of the screen are the covers of two of the SSI's reports titled Threat Assessment in Schools, A Guide to Managing Threatening Situations and to Creating Safe Schools Climates, and the final report and findings of the Safe School Initiative, Implications for the Prevention of School Attacks in the United States. These resources can be downloaded from the handouts box on your screen or from the TA Center's website. Amongst other things, the SSI had 10 key findings, such as targeted violence in schools are rarely sudden impulsive acts, and others usually knew about the attacker's idea or plan. The SSI also suggested that threat assessments may be an effective way to prevent targeted violence in schools by students. Information that activates a threat assessment may come in a variety of forms from different sources, such as leakage. According to the 2000 FBI report, The School Shooter, A Threat Assessment Perspective, one form of leakage occurs when a student intentionally or unintentionally reveals clues to feelings, thoughts, fantasies, attitudes, or intentions that may signal an impeding violent act. These clues can take the form of subtle threats, boasts, innuendos, predictions, or ultimatums. The document describes how leakage may be spoken or conveyed in stories, diary entries, essays, poems, letters, songs, drawings, doodles, tattoos, or videos. With the advent of the internet and social media, leakage can now be displayed online. For example, diary entries can be made on the platform WordPress, messages can be posted to sites like Facebook or Twitter, music videos can be created on Musical.ly, and videos posted on YouTube. We'll discuss the different forms of social media shortly. We're now going to move into part 2 of the webinar on social media and threat assessments. Social media can be defined as online and other electronic tools used to share and create content. The images on your screen are from some of the more popular social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter. On this slide, you'll see that social media can be categorized into social networking, blogging, microblogging, instant messaging and texting, photo sharing, video sharing, wikis, and online multiplayer games or virtual worlds. Again, some of the icons under the categories are from some of the more common social media platforms. Social media is very popular with youth. According to a report released by the Pew Research Center in 2015, 92% of teens report going online daily, 24% report going online almost constantly. Facebook is the most popular social media site among American teens aged 13 to 17, with 71% of all teens using the site, and 71% of teens report using more than one social networking site. There are several positive aspects of social media. These include the ability of schools to use it as a tool to promote a positive school climate through, for example, notifying and encouraging students to attend school-sponsored events such as school dances, sporting events, student performances, or other school activities. Communicate with students, teachers, staff, and parents or guardians. Communication can be two-way so that school officials can communicate with parents and guardians or vice versa. And inform the school community during emergencies through updates via platforms such as Facebook and Twitter when other communication channels such as telephone lines may be impacted. However, there are also challenges associated with social media for schools. For example, school staff can use social media to monitor students' activity. While there are benefits to being able to do this, privacy and other legal issues can arise. For example, schools may need to determine whether messages posted online by a student are disrupting the educational process and whether they are protected by the First Amendment. Students can also use social media to pose or make an actual threat to a student, students, the school, or locality. These threats can range from bullying to targeted violence. Similarly, social media can be used to create hoax threats to the same populations. We'll provide examples of this shortly. In addition, many social media platforms enable these threats to be made anonymously, which brings its own sets of challenges. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, has found that depending on how the researchers have defined and studied cyber aggression, between 9% and 35% of young people are victims of cyber aggression. Between 4% and 21% are perpetrators. 14.8% of students have reported being electronically bullied via email, chat rooms, instant messaging, websites, or texting during the previous 12 months. Cyberbullying can include perpetrators threatening victims with harm, spreading rumors, assuming the identity of the victim, and sending or receiving inappropriate messages or photos. Students can be bullied due to characteristics such as their sexual orientation or identity, appearance, race, religion, or school performance. Cyber aggression has been linked to higher levels of depression, lower levels of self-esteem, and lower GPA. Also, due to issues such as the anonymity of perpetrators and the absence of time and space constraints, victims may feel a sense of increased vulnerability and lack of control from cyber aggression that can potentially cause greater harm than traditional forms of face-to-face aggression. With such high incidence of online aggression and numbers of students being impacted, districts and schools need to consider including these types of threats in their Emergency Operations Plan, or EOP. We'll discuss this process in greater detail in the next part of the webinar. The image on your screen is one example of a threat of targeted violence to a school by a student. It appears as though the photograph was taken with a smartphone, and it shows some students in the background with the words, "Planning the school shooting," with 3 smiley faces. The image was posted by a male high schooler in Arizona on Snapchat. Snapchat is a popular mobile app that allows individuals to send videos and pictures that self-destruct after a few seconds of a person viewing them. In this instance, the female student saw the image and forwarded it to her mother. Her mother told her to alert the authorities, so she told the school resource officer. The teen who sent the image was arrested for a felony. So far, we've talked about threat assessments and how social media can play a role in posing or identifying threats. In part 3 of the webinar, we'll discuss how social media can be integrated into threat assessment planning. We'll begin with some brief background information on the creation of federal guidance, which has informed a lot of our thinking about developing emergency operations plans and how threat assessments can be incorporated into emergency planning efforts. Following the events of Newtown, Connecticut, the U.S. Department of Education, or ED, the U.S. Department of Justice, led by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, led by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, work together to provide the best possible guidance to communities on how to plan for and recover from the many emergency situations they may encounter. Together, these 6 agencies drew upon their respective areas of expertise in this field and customized these recommendations to schools. As a result, one product created by the group was the Guide for Developing High-Quality School Emergency Operations Plans, also known as the School Guide. The guide aligns and builds upon years of emergency planning work by the federal government and, along with the guides for institutions of higher education and places of worship, the first joint product of DHS, DOJ, ED, and HHS on this critical topic. The School Guide lists several categories of threats and hazards that can be faced by schools, districts, and localities and addressed in an EOP. These include natural hazards, such as wildfires and floods, technological hazards, such as power failures, biological hazards, such as seasonal flu and fluid contaminations, and adversarial, incidental, and human-caused threats. While the focus of the SSI and REMS approach to threat assessments is on targeted violence, there are several additional adversarial, incidental, and human-caused events that districts or school threat assessment teams may focus on, including gang violence, bullying, bomb threats, and suicide or self-harm. The School Guide also explains that 6 principles are key to developing a comprehensive school EOP that addresses a range of threats and hazards. These principles are: planning must be supported by leadership. Planning uses assessments to customize plans to the building level. Planning provides all threats and hazards through an all-hazards approach. Planning provides for the needs of the whole community. A 5th principle that is especially pertinent to threat assessments and social media is that creating and revising an EOP is done by following a collaborative process. Collaboration can occur internally with individuals such as other staff members, students who are knowledgeable in latest social media being used by the student body, and parents or guardians. Collaboration can occur externally with groups such as law enforcement and mental or behavioral health teams. Mia Langheim will shortly discuss in greater detail the collaborative process to help identify and monitor online threats. The 6th principle is that planning considers all settings and all times. Again, this is important to consider with regards to threat assessments and social media. As threats can be made online, can be made anywhere. Students have to be on school property for them to occur. Can be made 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They can be made anonymously, and they can reach a larger audience very quickly. In addition, the School Guide describes the nation's approach to preparedness and defines preparedness around the 5 mission areas of prevention, mitigation, protection, response, and recovery. This approach is based on the National Preparedness Goal and National Preparedness System. The 5 mission areas are defined as follows. Prevention means the capabilities necessary to avoid, deter, or stop an imminent crime or threatened or actual mass casualty event. Mitigation are those actions to eliminate or reduce the loss of life and property while lessening the impact of an event or emergency. Protection is securing schools against acts of violence and man-made or natural disasters. Response are those actions and capabilities to stabilize an emergency once it has already happened. Recovery means the capabilities necessary to assist schools affected by an emergency or event, restoring the learning environment. Of the 5 mission areas, prevention may be the most important in the context of threat assessments, as we want to stop targeted violence from occurring in the first place. Once a district or school has done as much as they can to prevent targeted violence, such as through the implementation of a threat assessment process, the focus can then shift to other mission areas such as response. These mission areas generally align with the 3 timeframes associated with an incident: before, during, and after. When it comes to threat assessments, the planning team will want to ensure that these 5 mission areas continue before, during, and after an incident. We can apply the 5 mission areas to preparedness for targeted violence in schools. For example, we can prevent targeted violence from occurring by building a positive school climate, protect by establishing clear policies and rules on acceptable behavior and how to report concerns or threats, mitigate by educating students, staff, and families on what is acceptable behavior and where individuals can turn to for emotional support, respond by stopping an incident as it occurs, and recover by supporting the person posing the threat and the target of the threat. I now want to hand the presentation over to Madeline, who will discuss the 6-step planning process. Madeline?
Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So these planning principles can aid a district or a school as they prepare for emergencies, including creating new emergency operations plans, or EOPs, revising them, or reviewing components of them through a 6-step planning process. And if you look at the graphics, there's 6 steps, with step 1 being forming a collaborative planning team, step 2, understanding the situation, step 3, determine goals and objectives, step 4, plan development, step 5, plan preparation, review, and approval, and finally step 6, plan implementation and maintenance. Next slide is, so here we will be talking about step 1. Step 1 is form a collaborative planning team. Collaborative team can be formed that includes a core planning team, community partners, school stakeholders, and a district representative, if applicable. The planning team's composition and size will vary on the aspects of the plan it's working on, as well as the unique school community. Team members may include a student representative who understands what technology and apps students are using and how, a parent or guardian representative who can help discuss the needs of parents and guardians, but also how these adults can work with the school officials to identify concerns. Other experts in the community who work with social media and youth, such as the General Attorney's Office. And then the bullying prevention coordinator and a representative from the IT department. Next slide. In step 2, it's called Understand the Situation. This is where we work to learn the different characteristics of the environment. In this step, the planning team identifies threats and hazards that are likely to affect the school and surrounding community. First, they conduct assessments, which may include a site assessment, a culture and climate assessment, a capacity assessment, and a behavioral threat assessment. So one example of a culture and climate assessment schools can use is from the National Center on Safe and Supportive Learning Environments Technical Assistance Center. We call it the Nestle TA Center for short. This is another one of the Department of Education's Technical Assistance Centers, which provides you with free trainings, resources, and services. So here you'll find a collective of ED school climate surveys. For threat assessments, the threat assessment team can use these guiding principles to lead their investigation and determine if the student needs an intervention and the type of intervention and which agencies would be involved in such an intervention. The REMS TA Center's toolbox, which is also online, provides a sample threat assessment documentation, including threat assessment and response protocols and interview forms from the Fairfax County Public Schools in Virginia. The ED Safe Climate Surveys web-based administration platform, including a suite of school climate surveys for middle and high school students, instructional staff, non-instructional staff, parents, and guardians, can be downloaded free of charge from the Nestle website. The link is available on your screen. The survey asks such questions such as, students often spread rumors or lies about others at this school on the internet, and so the user would respond yes or no. If students hear about a threat or school or student safety, they would report it to someone in authority, and again, the user would respond yes or no. Now, Mia Langham from the Illinois Fusion Center will now provide some examples from Step 1, working with a collaborative planning team, and Step 2, understanding the situation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Madeline, Paul, and all of the REMS TA and Department of Ed for allowing me to join in on this discussion. My name is Mia. I work for the State of Illinois Fusion Center, which I will explain what a fusion center is here in a bit. I was hired about 3.5 years ago, right after Sandy Hook. The idea was that my fusion center wanted to improve communication with schools and campuses about safety issues. I created and have maintained the school safety information sharing program since that time. This August, last month, yesterday, starts the 4th full school year that I have been in this position. And that amount of safety information, really seems to increase every year. So I'm going to go through 2 parts for this part of the presentation. The first part, I'm going to discuss what a fusion center is. And then I'm going to tell you what the Statewide Terrorism Intelligence Center, STIC, how they really work together and handle information that comes in and how that process works as a fusion center. And then I'm going to go into what the School Safety Information Sharing Program contains. The second part is that I'm actually going to go into the suspicious activity through social media. So starting out, a fusion center is a post-9/11 thought process. Before 9/11, there were many organizations that were tasked with keeping the United States safe. However, they rarely, if ever, shared information. In the 9/11 after-action review, this was a main point brought up, and it was strongly recommended to find a way to correct this lack of information sharing. As a result, fusion centers were created. A fusion center is an organization where many people from many different local, state, and federal organizations work together. For example, my fusion center, STIC, contains intel analysts, crime analysts, terrorist analysts, state police, a Department of Homeland Security representative, a Federal Bureau of Investigations representative, Army National Guard personnel, and a few others. Every state in the U.S. has a fusion center. Some larger cities also have a fusion center. Combined, there are just over 70 fusion centers in the United States. All fusion centers also share information between each other, but they all work differently at the same time. STIC, the fusion center I work for, was created in 2003, and it was one of the first ones established. It is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, and 365-day-a-year operation. There has to be a minimal of 3 analysts working at any given time, and there's often many more than that. The picture that you see is a room where everyone sits and everyone works together. Everyone in this room only works with law enforcement. If a local state police officer has a question about a subject, sees something suspicious, wants to give us a heads up, or needs additional support with their investigation, they call into our fusion center to request it. STIC can only help with law enforcement if there's a criminal that's out there that's being investigated, a crime might be committed, or it falls under suspicious activity. The main objective for STIC is to protect the public from all crimes, all hazards. And with this in mind, the question often comes up, how do you protect the public from all crimes, all hazards if you only work with law enforcement? As a result, a year after STIC opened, the first outreach program was created. It's called Infrastructure Security Awareness, and it was created in 2004, and it works with large businesses in Illinois, and it also has spanned throughout the rest of the country as well. As time has gone on, you can see you can see in chronological order all the programs that have been created. The School Safety Program was created in 2013, and the newest program is the Disaster Program, which was created about a year ago. All of these programs also work together. All programs work with those who are non-law enforcement, but are people who are concerned with what's going on in their organization and want to keep everyone in their organization safe, including their buildings. They are in a position of need to know to keep their organization safe. These programs are all run by people who are on a daily basis are responsible for going through what comes in to stick. People like myself are sorting through what is distributed by the federal government and other fusion centers, and we're also keeping an eye on the news and the internet, including social media, 24 hours a day. By doing this, those of us who run a program such as myself will look through all of this information and pull out what will be useful to help improve safety decisions, resources, and knowledge and pass it along to our program members. Program members are required to sign an application and a non-disclosure agreement, which basically gives us the okay that we can do a basic safety check on their application, and the applicant understands that they are receiving information that is for their use only and not appropriate for others. This is really, really important because the information we send out is to help prevent something bad from happening, and it's also not to be given to the bad guys because it could give them tips to also help them commit a crime. The School Safety Information Sharing Program is a little different from all the other programs. I work with not only administrators in the school and also in campuses, but I also work with law enforcement who are primarily in schools and campuses. The goal is to aid in school safety efforts through sharing information with them from local, state, and federal agencies about current trends and threats that could impact their students, staff, faculty, and building facilities. So the Statewide Terrorism Intelligence Center is a collaboration of organizations. It's working with all the federal government, local and state police, along with other fusion centers and other intel that comes into our center. It's a lot of information. That information I go through to see what could affect schools and campuses. Again, I'm also looking at open source information, so anything that could be Googled, anything in the news, anything on social media that could affect schools and campuses. The beauty of this program is that not only am I using STIC as a resource, the internet, but I'm also using other program members. It's not uncommon for other program members to call in and talk to me about something going in at their school. The benefit to this is because not only will that school be dealing with something that's a safety concern, but it's not uncommon for another school to have the exact same safety concern. This is good because I can pass that information along to other schools, or if it's a trend, I can find additional information to pass along to the program members. So the sky's the limit about what kind of information comes out through this program. So getting into the second part of my presentation, this is a list of all the suspicious activity throughout social media that to be concerned about. This is constantly a big concern for everyone. I have heard of cybercrimes and hacking being committed by kids who are gaming on school networks. By these kids gaming on school networks, there's other actors that can come in and hack into school systems, which also becomes a concern because school networks hold a lot of personal identifying information for the students. Also, some things are downloaded through social media accounts such as Twitter that have been known to direct students to downloading a virus that can cause the computer to become more at risk for hacking. These are all really serious concerns for school network in general. A continuing trend is that students who are suicidal will post their intentions on social media. There have been situations where other students have encouraged those students to commit suicide, and occasionally others will help the students do research to figure out how to commit suicide. All of this is being talked about online. There have been conversations after conversations documented by STIC, by myself, and others that we have seen. Bullying is also taking off through social media. I'm sure if you have worked in a school, you have dealt with this issue. Often, even if the bullying is offline and outside of school hours, it will affect the learning environment in schools. Another example is violence and targeted attacks have also been posted online prior to the incident or event, even during the incident. Often if someone sees this and can get word to the police or administration, these situations can be prevented. I work with a school police officer who often reviews social media within their school and will find students planning to fight during lunchtime, for example. I've heard that he has called his local police department ask for additional officers to be at the school during the lunch period, and the fight will never happen. This is a common occurrence in his school, and many, many fights have been prevented because of this. Gangs are also posting online. It's been interesting because recently they're communicating using emojis, making it more difficult to decode. Shooting and bomb threats are often posted online. I myself do a very general social media review to look specifically at threats and have found many that have led to arrest of individuals who are a threat to schools or campuses. This is a big job, and having others keep an eye on this type of behavior is appreciated to all of us who hold schools near and dear to our heart. Sometimes kids post something on social media that's a joke. They don't totally understand that that's not an appropriate joke. So having conversations with students is important to remind them of how to handle online social media behavior and what is okay to post and what is not okay to post. There's a lot of ways that this can help prevent any sort of crime or any sort of bullying and a lot of other things within your school. There have been many other situations on social media, and often kids simply who use social media prior to doing something that can harm themselves or others that is a basic cry for help. Or it can show indicators that someone needs to reach out to the student if they see something online. As Paul mentioned earlier, a lot of the things that students are posting online that are a threat to themselves or others, this is all considered leakage. One of the most studied types of suspicious activity on social media is bomb threats. This is just one organization that did 2 studies during the fall semester of consecutive years. The first study was during a 6-month period and found that 35%, or 109 out of 315 bomb threats were communicated through social media, email, or text message. The following year, they shortened the study to 5 months and found that 37%, or 299 out of 812 shooting and bomb threats were communicated through social media, email, or text messages. The study actually found that a large percent of the threats were communicated online, 231 out of 299. The interesting part of the study that I always like to point out is that bomb threats were spread evenly between all 5 school days, and 70% of high schools were being targeted. Threats between the 2 years increased by 158%, and I would predict that if this study would be repeated, it would show that bomb threats have increased even more, and social media threats would still be a large concern. These are 2 examples of rumors floating around on social media that there was a threat to someone's school that the students knew about. I've seen multiple situations where rumors are floating around on social media, but none of the staff, faculty, or law enforcement at the school had any idea. There was a bystander study that the U.S. Secret Service and Department of Ed did that found students often didn't tell what they knew because of a negative school climate, misjudging the likelihood of attack, and that they thought the teachers already knew. And it has been found that in some cases the teachers did already know. Youth don't believe they will always be taken seriously, and they aren't always sure that there will be actions completed when they do report a threat like this. The point is that students, faculty, and staff need to be told that it is okay to report these types of situations, and school personnel need to know exactly how to handle and who to tell when one of these types of threats are brought up. As I mentioned earlier, it is not uncommon for kids to use social media to cry out for help. This is a social media post I stumbled across of a student who had been discussing suicide for over a year using Twitter. The student's from California, and I reached out to their Fusion Center to let them know about it. The California Fusion Center was able to find out who the student was, what school they went to, and reached out to their administration and law enforcement, and was able to get the student help because that student was very depressed and very suicidal. I've come across multiple similar situations, and every time the school says they had no idea, no one alerted it to them, and that they were very grateful to be able to help one of their students. This is a post of an actual school shooter Twitter behavior right up to the point they went into their school and committed what we all fear. You can see the student must have had some relationship issues, was really upset, and this went on for at least 5 months prior to this person going into the school and not only killing others, but also themselves. There's obviously a lot of emotions being expressed that show this student really needed professional help, but this message was never passed along to the right adults. When you're looking at online threats, these are some things to consider to improve preparedness. If you're thinking about getting some sort of application that can help you monitor social media activity in your school or around your school, there's a lot of things to consider. The biggest one is the geographical area versus search terms and keywords. So what that means basically is that the geographical area is basically a fence that you put up, and that fence is any place that you are monitoring. So for example, if you have a school, you might put a fence around that block that the school lands on. Search terms and keywords are basically that. So if you're looking for shooter, fight, bomb, anything along those lines, those are search terms and keywords. So applications can either use a geographical area, or they can use search terms and keywords, or they can use both. This is important to consider for every school because every school is different and every school has different needs. Also, the price of some of these applications are pretty big. So getting all the information first would be a really important first step. It's important to note that using a geofence or a geographical area is not always effective. I've heard recent reports that only about 10% of people now have their locations turned on. Also to know, a lot of these applications can give you a free trial. There are multiple applications, so you can go out and just search for them, and I'm sure you can come up with a couple pretty easily. Also, the last thing to consider when purchasing an application like this is know that once you purchase something, you'll actually have to provide manpower to run that and review it. Even though it's up and running, somebody needs to actually have eyes on it to see if anything does come up, and it would be important to check multiple times during the day. A bigger help than an application is to encourage communication between students, parents, and staff regarding social media suspicious activity. Make it clear that it is okay to report this type of activity, it will be taken seriously, that it is confidential, and the overall goal is safety. It's not to get anybody in trouble, but it's to keep the school safe. Have an internal idea of what someone should do, like a teacher, if they do receive a threat like this, report it to them by a student or someone else. Even though it might seem like common sense, it's been shown that sometimes people don't report things because they don't know who to report it to. Also, becoming aware of current threat trends is important to help identify suspicious activity. This is kind of a plug for my program, a school safety program. And it's basically that the program that I have, it will send out free information that will let you know what trends are going on and also what to be aware of that can impact your school safety and keep your community improving communication. My program is not just for Illinois, it's also for anyone who's interested. And the last tip that I have is the easiest way to understand what kids are experiencing on social media and be able to join in discussions dealing with social media is to download and play with the apps that they're using. Yik Yak is a good one. Even though Yik Yak does prevent the area that a school is from anyone to yak inside that school area, you will still get a good idea about what's happening in the neighborhood. There's another example. I heard of a police officer who wasn't familiar with all the applications and social media apps out there, so he downloaded Snapchat. Him and another coworker figured out how to use Snapchat and really took off with it. He has all sorts of badges. He really knows how to use it, and it's really a fun thing for him. The benefit to that is with that as well, he's able to talk to his kids and get them to communicate with him. as well, and they can kind of understand one another and joke about it. It's a good way to get a connection. It's important to note that most kids have Facebook, but they don't always use it as often because parents also have Facebook nowadays. They're using Instagram and Twitter as well. Also, MySpace is important to note. Recently, Justin Timberlake bought it, so more and more kids are going that way. So this is my contact information. I'm happy to answer anybody's questions. If you want to email me, also stick around for the chat. And this program is available for everyone, not just those in Illinois. The link at the bottom is also a web link to my contact information and monthly newsletters that I have created, and that can be shared since the start of the program. I encourage you all to take a look if you're interested. I'm now going to turn it back over to the REMS TA Center.
Hi there, it's Madeline Sullivan, actually from the Department of Ed. Thank you, Mia. It was fascinating, very fascinating, and I learned a lot. So you gave me a couple of moments of pause. I really appreciate your contributions. So back to the 6-step process. So we just learned from Mia a number of different types of vehicles in which students can make threats, and she also described the different types of threats we need to take into consideration. So following those efforts, the planning team would work together, and they would develop goals and objectives. Goals are broad general statements that indicate that desired outcome in response to a threat or hazard. And objectives are specific, measurable actions that are necessary to achieve those goals. So the planning team decides which of the threats and hazards identified in Step 2 will be addressed in the school EOP, and then develops goals and objectives for each. If targeted violence is going to be addressed, a possible goal might be prevent targeted violence from occurring. And the objective to achieve this goal might be identify students who may pose a threat. In Step 4, the goal is to assign action for accomplishing those planning goals and objectives. The courses of action are much more detailed, and they address the who, the what, the when, and the how for a response to each hazard, threat, and function, and include criteria for determining how and when each response will be implemented under a variety of circumstances. For example, to address the objective of identify students who may pose a threat, what the planning team may decide is who's the point of contact on the threat assessment team to report concerns to, what needs to be done once a threat is identified, when students, teachers, or staff should report a threat or concern, and how students, teachers, and staff can report a threat or a concern. In Step 5, the team is going to be developing that plan and sharing it again and reviewing and going through the approval process. So after determining the goals, objectives, and courses of action, the planning team is ready to move into Step 5. While the content of the EOP was developed in Steps 3 and 4, now in Step 5, the content is written out and then reviewed. The school EOPs are traditionally broken down, or the traditional format for school EOPs is broken down into 3 sections: the basic plan, functional annexes, threat and hazard-specific annexes. This is just one format. Districts and schools are encouraged to work with their community partners to choose the format that works best for them in communicating one another's roles and responsibilities. So the basic plan section of the school EOP provides an overview of the school's approach to emergency operations. The functional annexes section details the goals, objectives, and courses of action of essential cross-cutting functions that may be needed in a variety of emergencies, such as evacuation, lockdown, communications, and accounting for students. Third part, threat and hazard specific annexes. This section specifies the goals, objectives, and courses of action that a school will follow before, during, and after a particular type of threat or hazard, such as an active shooter, hurricane, or fire. So generally, human-caused incidents are classed as threats, and natural disasters are classed as hazards. So in inclusion in the EOP. So the planning team might want to consider including specific information on how to respond to targeted violence in schools. In a behavioral threat assessment annex and several functional annexes. So for example, information can be integrated into a behavioral threat assessment annex, which addresses how to respond to targeted violence in school. When developing goals, objectives, and courses of action, the planning team may want to consider which representatives should participate on the threat assessment team, how the team will help to ensure that processes put in place, such as monitoring of students, social media, how it complies with applicable privacy, civil rights, and other applicable laws. We have the public health, medical, mental, behavioral health annex. For this, the planning team may want to consider how the school will support the needs of students identified by the threat assessment team. And for the security annex, how to respond to threats identified by the threat assessment team. In step 6, it's plan implementation and maintenance. So in step 6, we're going to be working on, the planning team is going to be tasked with implementing and maintaining the plan and continually working to review and update portions of it at a time, or sometimes the entire plan over a course of a year. Step 1, training stakeholders on the plan, including annexes and their responsibilities. So for example, teachers and staff can be trained on what student online activity may be of a concern. For 2, conducting exercises such as seminars and tabletop exercises, drills, functional exercises, and full-scale exercises. And 3, identify lessons learned from both exercises and actual emergencies, and then implement corrective actions. For 4, the EOP, including annexes, should be reviewed at least annually and updated as necessary. So as a reminder, the SSI and the REMS-TA Center's approach focuses on the threat of targeted violence. However, the use of the 6-step planning process may identify additional threats that the threat assessment team may want to address in an EOP, such as gangs and fights and bullying and possible suicide. And now I'm going to take an opportunity to explain how the 6-step planning process can help identify the threat of cyberbullying and mechanisms to respond to the threat. Step 1, form a collaborative planning team. The planning team may include a bullying prevention coordinator who serves on an ad hoc basis. Step 2, understand the situation. A climate assessment can be conducted, and results may show that cyberbullying is occurring in the school, with specifics such as the individual is being victimized, what social media platforms are being used and how, and the frequency of cyberbullying in the school. This same step 2 can be supported by doing some of the surveillance activities that we just learned about from Mia. In step 3, determine goals and objectives. The planning team may determine that bullying, including cyberbullying, is a threat that needs to be addressed in the EOP. The team may decide that one goal to address cyberbullying, for example, is to prevent cyberbullying from occurring. Sample objective might be to teach students how to respond to cyberbullying. In step 4, plan development, the courses of action outline all of the specific steps that the school will take. So for example, using the assessment data, the planning team might select a matching prevention program and set specific steps to take to protect and support a student who has been cyberbullied. Step 5, plan preparation, review, and approval. As the plan is developed, policies and processes supporting a bullying initiative can be formalized, including requirements for the reporting process if that is mandated by the state or district. In step 6, plan implementation and maintenance, efforts can focus on raising awareness of bullying, what it looks like, and resources to help those who are bullied. Additionally, the school may choose to provide training on its bullying initiatives and programs. The REMS TA Center is providing additional information on planning for bullying in the September 7th webinar, Integrating Bullying Prevention Efforts into Emergency Management Planning. You may also want to participate in other webinars that we're providing, such as Incorporating Sextortion into School EOP Planning. More information on these webinars and others can be found on the REMS TA Center's webinars pages, and we're also providing information about them via our Twitter account at REMS TA Center. So, legal considerations. Districts and schools also need to consider some of the legal aspects of implementing threat assessments and working to do surveillance and monitoring in the social media world. General counsel can be a key member of a district's or school's planning team. A representative may be able to contribute to the development and implementation of procedures and policies as they relate to 1, information sharing, including how to ensure compliance with any federal, state, or local laws, such as the requirements put forth within the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, otherwise known as FERPA, and the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, otherwise known as HIPAA. Information sharing is discussed further in a closer look section of the school guide, which again is available for download from the handouts box on your screen or from the TA Center's website. General counsel can also contribute to the development and implementation of procedures and policies as they relate to student conduct and use of technology, such as computers and telephones, and parameters for any surveillance and monitoring of student activity.
Thank you, Madeline. We're now going to move into the final part of our presentation, which is the question and answer session. And I believe we have time for one question that's come in. And Mia, this is directed at you. What does the data indicate regarding threats being averted because of positive relationships between students and staff, such as a trusted adult? And we have about a minute or two to answer that question.
I don't know of any data. However, I have experience with administrators and law enforcement telling me that after they have begun to understand social media and been able to talk to their students about a certain app, Snapchat, Twitter, whatever the case may be, it's actually helped to improve their relationship. I have examples in the past that this better relationship has led to an increase in communication, and the students become more comfortable talking to that adult, especially when they have a problem or they want to report an issue.
Great, thank you. And if anybody has any additional questions, they can also reach out to Mia, who provided a contact information. We're also going to be having a half-hour Twitter chat, which I'll mention shortly.
I also recommend contacting the our Nestle TA Center, the National Center on Safe and Supporting Learning Environments. They might have some information on that. So between the two education technical assistance centers, to over-summarize, we both work for Safe and Healthy Schools, and a lot of their work provides schools with tools for measuring school climate and then services for addressing those challenges. And so they might have some information to help you with that question, Greg.
Thank you, Madeline. You can also contact the TA Center for any questions or requests for technical assistance at info@remstacenter.org or through the toll-free number 1-855-781-REMS or 7367. The TA Center's hours of operation are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We also encourage you to visit the TA Center website for additional information about TA Center resources, such as our community of practice. As I just mentioned, immediately after this webinar, we'll also be having a Twitter chat for half an hour where we'll be answering questions and sharing information about threat assessments in schools and posing our own. So follow us on Twitter, search for @REMSTACenter and or #K12 threat assessments. Thank you for your time today, and this concludes the webinar.